Hello everybody, well we're starting a new book and today I'm going to read you the start of that book. The book is Esio Trot by Roald Dahl. Some of you might have read it before, that's okay. That's okay. I'm going to read the start of the book and we're going to talk about some of the vocabulary and then we've got a reading comprehension just to make sure we know what's going on at the start of the story. So, before we start reading, let me just tell you a little bit about the book. So, the book is called Esio Trot, and it's a short novel. A novel is a story. A short story, a short novel by Roald Dahl with illustrations, pictures by Quentin Blake. It was published in 1990, which was actually just before Roald Dahl died. And it's actually often described as one of his sunniest stories. What does it mean? Well, when the weather is sunny, I always feel a little bit happier and brighter and really hopeful. And that's what it is to say that this is one of his sunniest stories. It means one of his happiest stories, one of his most positive stories, one of his most optimistic stories. I'll tell you a little bit about Roald Dahl. I'll bet you know some Roald Dahl books, so make sure you comment in Google Classroom to say which is your favourite Roald Dahl story. You might know already that Roald Dahl was born in Cardiff in 1916 and he died in Oxford in 1990. His parents, because he has an unusual name, Roald Dahl, his parents were both Norwegian and they had come to the UK as immigrants looking for work, and he grew up speaking Norwegian at home. And he was actually named after a very famous Norwegian explorer called Roald Amundsen, who was the first person to get to the South Pole. And he wrote many famous books and short stories for adults and children, including Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Fantastic Mr. Fox, The Twits, Matilda, and the BFG, Big Friendly Giant. And we often see pictures of him when he was older, so I thought I'd put a picture in from 1954 when he was 38. So, here is the story starting. We introduce the characters. These are the characters, the protagonists, and we are meeting in this story Mr. Hoppy and Mrs. Silver here. They're the two main characters, but here are some more characters who all have something important in the story. Alfie, he's a tortoise. We have a pet shop owner, and then we have something that plays a part in the story, is not a character, but an invention of Mr. Hoppy's, the tortoise catcher. So, let's start the story. Roald Dahl, Esio Trot, illustrations by Quentin Blake. Mr. Hoppy lived in a small flat, high up in a tall concrete building. He lived alone. He had always been a lonely man, and now that he was retired from work, he was more lonely than ever. There were two loves in Mr. Hoppy's life. One was the flowers he grew on his balcony. They grew in pots and tubs and baskets, and in summer the little balcony became a riot of colour. Mr. Hoppy's second love was a secret he kept entirely to himself. Now, we'll just quickly talk about some of the vocabulary. So, Mr. Hoppy was retired from work. So, retired, just so we all know, retired is when you stop working, perhaps you're getting a little bit older, and you live on the money that you've saved, and a pension. And normally that's in your 60s. Some people retire a bit younger, some a little bit older, but normally in your 60s. And we have it here that the little balcony became a riot of colour. So first of all, the balcony is this, isn't it? That bit that we build out. So here above, coming at window level, we can walk slightly out. We've got our balcony. And his little balcony became a riot of colour. A riot of colours means lots of bright, vibrant colours. Mr. Hoppy's second love was a secret he kept entirely to himself. Entirely means completely, wholly, totally to himself. He didn't tell anybody. Let's keep reading. The balcony, immediately below Mr. Hoppy's, jutted out a good bit further from the building than his own. So Mr. Hoppy always had a fine view of what was going down there. This balcony belonged to an attractive, middle-aged lady called Mrs. Silver. Mrs. Silver was a widow who also lived alone, and although she didn't know it, it was she who was the object of Mr. Hoppy's secret love. He had loved her from his balcony for many years. But he was a very shy man, and he had never been able to bring himself to give her even the smallest hint of his love. Every morning, Mr. Hoppy and Mrs. Silver exchanged polite conversation, the one looking down from above, the other looking up, but that was as far as it ever went. The distance between their balconies might not have been more than a few yards, but to Mr. Hoppy it seemed like 1,000,000 miles. He longed to invite Mrs. Silver up for a cup of tea and a biscuit, but every time he was about to form the words on his lips, his courage failed him. As I said, he was a very, very shy man. So, we know what a balcony is, don't we? This is the bit here, the balcony. Immediately below means straight below. So Mr. Hoppy is here. Mrs. Silver is here. So immediately below, straight below. Mrs. Silver was a widow. A woman who was married, but her husband sadly died. And if it's a man whose wife has sadly died, then we say a widower. Mr. Hoppy had not dared to give a hint of his love. To give a hint is to give a little clue about something. And the two of them would stand on their balconies and exchange polite conversation. To exchange polite conversation here means to talk about little things like the weather. And Mr. Hoppy longed to invite Mrs. Silver. To long to do something is to really, deeply want to do something. Let's keep going. Oh, if only, he kept telling himself, if only he could do something tremendous, like saving her life or rescuing her from a gang of armed thugs. If only he could perform some great feat that would make him a hero in her eyes. If only. The trouble with Mrs. Silver was that she gave all her love to somebody else. And that somebody was a small tortoise called Alfie. Every day, when Mr. Hoppy looked over his balcony and saw Mrs. Silver whispering endearments to Alfie and stroking his shell, he felt absurdly jealous. He wouldn't even have minded becoming a tortoise himself if it meant Mrs. Silver stroking his shell each morning and whispering endearments to him. So we can see in this picture here, can't we? Here's Mr. Hoppy daydreaming. He's too shy to speak to Mrs. Silver, and he hopes that he could perform here some great feat. A feat is an achievement which takes skill or courage. So he daydreams that maybe some big thugs would attack Mrs. Silver and he would leap in and save her. She would think him a hero. And then Mrs. Silver loves Alfie and she whispers endearments. Now, endearment's an interesting word. It's got the word dear in it, hasn't it? And if someone is very dear to you, it means you really like them, perhaps you love them. And Mrs. Silver loves Alfie. She whispers endearments to him. She says, "Oh, my little dear, oh, my little lovely Alfie, how are you? Oh, lovely Alfie, how are you doing?" And Mr. Hoppy felt absurdly jealous. Something that is absurd makes no sense. It doesn't make sense for a human to be jealous about a tortoise because the tortoise's owner loves them, but Mr. Hoppy is jealous, absurdly jealous. It means it's crazy that he is so jealous. Okay. Alfie had been with Mrs. Silver for years, and he lived on her balcony summer and winter. Planks had been placed around the sides of the balcony. Look, here are the planks. So that Alfie could walk about without toppling over the edge. And in one corner there was a little house into which Alfie would crawl every night to keep warm. When the colder weather came along in November, Mrs. Silver would fill Alfie's house with dry hay, and the tortoise would crawl in there and bury himself deep under the hay and go to sleep for months on end without food or water. This is called hibernating. In early spring, when Alfie felt the warmer weather through his shell, he would wake up and crawl very slowly out of his house onto the balcony. And Mrs. Silver would clap her hands with joy and cry out, "Welcome back, my darling one! Oh, how I have missed you!" It was at times like these that Mr. Hoppy wished more than ever that he could change places with Alfie and become a tortoise. So, what we've done here is we have put a slightly abridged version of the opening. Abridged is this word here. It means slightly shortened. I haven't put all of the text in, but I've put some of the text in. And then we have questions. Level 1, Level 2, Level 3. Now the Level 4 questions are what we call inference questions, which is when you've got to work something out from a clue in the text. And perhaps the text won't tell you exactly the answer, but you can work it out. But you've got to use the words in the text to give you the clue to answer the question. And for Level 5, I've got some research questions that you can have a go at. So it may help you to listen to me read it again, to watch the video twice so that you can see what's going on with the pictures, so that you can look at the explanations for the words, because some of the words that I've explained are going to be used in these questions, so you might want to watch it again. But I hope you've enjoyed the start of the story, and I'm going to look forward to our next lesson about Esio Trot. Bye everyone! Hope to see you soon!